So with 291,000 kilometers on the odometer, our trusty Leaf AZE0 has just started to make the well recognizable squeak 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 noise from the brake pad sensor. I've had a quick look because these petals that are 3D printed can be pulled off easily, and it's the rear pads that need renewing, because this has the parking brake in a drum in the center of the rear disc. It's actually very straightforward to do, but I'll give you a quick run through. This applies to all vehicles with this type of caliper with a separate parking brake, but I'll give you a run through for the Leaf specifically, and obviously you can apply this to all vehicles that it does apply to. So rather frustratingly, I've gone to use my impact wrench to take the wheels off a car today, and the hose has failed here on the whip hose. It's relatively typical that they fail there, because that's the point that takes all the stress in the workshop. So I've cut the retaining clamp off with a angle grinder just to open up the clamp and then release it. I've cut the whip cable shorter. Just going to take off this dead bit of hose, and then we'll clamp on a replacement and we're good to go. So here we are, the old hose is cut off there. I've got a new clamp with the shortened section of hose. Push that on, but it needs two hands. And then I've got the special tool to clamp the clamp shut. Just fits on over each end here like this. Make sure it's nicely lined up, and then squeeze it down tight. That's done up. And just do the other side. These are CV boot clamp tools, but very good because the center bit there just pushes on the clamp to make sure that it doesn't go into a strange position. So clamp over, squeeze, and we're done. It's that easy when you've got all the tools and all the bits. So I'm going to have to do this old school and do it on the floor. It'd be much easier to do it on my ramp, but my ramp is occupied with this car I'm restoring at the moment. So I'm going to do it on the floor. The first thing to do is to engage the parking brake, which on these is just a foot pedal there. And then by lifting up just this wheel, the parking brake that's working on both, so this side will stay on the floor to start with and will stop the car rolling forwards. But as a point of principle, I always put a brick or a block in front of the front wheels anyway, just to make sure they can't roll away while it's on the jack. And there we go, my trusty brick kicked into position. That will help just to be doubly sure that the car doesn't roll away anyway. I'm going to do just one side at a time, so I'll move the brick to this side when I've finished changing the pads on this side. I'm using just a regular trolley jack. You'll notice that I've got it lined up kind of as much with the car as I can without letting the handle bang on the bodywork. I do this deliberately because if you've got it out here at 90 degrees, as the jack lifts, it tries to drag the car in this direction. And quite clearly, it's not going to want to do that. So by keeping it lined up forwards and backwards, that helps. I use these rubber bungs, which go on where the jacking point is predictably, but when the jack is holding that in place, that's actually pressing all around the jacking point, not just on the jacking point. And on some cars where it's a little bit marginal on the jacking point, this helps to spread the load and save any damage. It's a two-hand job to get this lined up, so I'll be back in a second. And there you can see I've got the puck now nicely engaged under the jacking point with the jack already in there. The other beauty with this is that because it makes the jack from lower, there's less forwards and backwards movement than if you were having to send the jack up higher, and therefore most of the movement on the jack is up and down, and therefore this takes me back to when I used to do everything mobile out to the back of a van. Happy those days are gone. So there we go. That's lifted clear. Just going to put an axle stand in there for safety, and then we'll get the wheel off. So the axle stand is there to catch the car if it should have a jack failure or anything like that. The wheel is off. I've got all my tools that I should need ready, so I don't have to keep standing up. And in the same vein, I have my trusty upturned beer crate, which works really nicely as a chair. At my age, I don't want to be standing up and sitting down continuously, stressing my knees while I do this job. So hopefully going to do it in one hit. The only thing will be if the calipers are slightly seized or the pads are seized into the caliper mounting, then I'll need some wire brushes to clean away the rust and make sure that everything's moving freely again. But the signs are that all is good, so I'm going to crack on. So the first thing is to remove the rubber dust cap. Many of the cars that I see haven't ever had them refitted, or they've fallen off in use, so I carry stock of spare ones quite predictably so that it can go out well. Then we need to just back off the bleed nipple, and I have a suction device that I use when I'm actually changing brake fluid, but when I'm just backing off the bleed nipple to let go of the pressure, I can just feed the pipe on over like that and do nothing other than undo the bleed nipple. Half a turn or a turn is usually sufficient, and then that means that when we pull the caliper across to free off the pads, we're not trying to push fluid back through the ABS system or through the master cylinder. Sometimes it's a little bit awkward finding a good place to put the lever to lever the pads back with. If I wasn't doing it single-handed, I'd make this look a lot easier. And now the pipe's fallen off for good measure too, so we're going to put that back, try and catch the worst of the fluid, and now we'll make sure that the brake pad piston is fully pushed back. There we go, that's pushed all the way back with just a levering tool. Now we can close up the bleed nipple. Slight slip from the ratchet there, but nothing to worry about. And then when I take the pipe off, I stand it up for a moment and the fluid just drains into the container. Doesn't make even more mess on the floor than I've already made. We can put the bleed nipple cover back on straight away, and then we need to undo the two bolts that hold the caliper to the caliper mounting. Okay, I thought from memory these were 13mm, they're actually 14mm, so against my wishes I'm going to have to stand up and go and swap the tool over. Okay, so I've changed the 14mm for 13mm. These are ratcheting spanners that I can just adjust it from here. We need to undo these two bolts that hold the caliper to the caliper mounting. Some brake manufacturers put a nut here that you need to put a very thin-headed 17mm spanner on generally to stop it rotating. From memory on these particular bolts, and we'll see this in a second, they're threaded here into the caliper and then they just push through into the caliper mounting. It's important when we take this apart to make sure they're nice and clean and well greased so that the caliper slides easily. It does move nicely anyway, but it's a double check that I always do to make sure we get no binding on the brakes. So yes, my aging memory has served me well. The thread on these is right at the top and it does screw into the caliper itself. As I say, there are some where the thread goes a little bit deeper and then it screws onto a boss that fits into the caliper mount here. The principle is the same, so you've got this clean bit that it slides on. So we'll put that to one side, we'll pop the other one out. I've already backed it off with the spanner, but it's too tight to do it by hand, so I'm going to have to grab the spanner and do it again. And throw the spanner around the floor, nice and easy with a ratchet spanner. If you choose the right ones to undo, when you come to do this second one, you can see here that I'm undoing clockwise because I'm behind it. but the stress of undoing it is actually holding the caliper in position, and it saves everything from jumping around madly. If I'd have done this one first, when I went to do the bottom one, the caliper would be trying to spring out of the way. So there we go, that's undone. I'm going to need both hands because I need to pull the brake flexi hose out of the way to get the spanner off and get the bolt out, and then we'll tuck the caliper out of the way and carry on. So in this instance, the bolt doesn't want to come out easily. I'm not going to stress the flexible brake hose, because if I push it down too hard, it can cause stress splitting on the hose. That can actually stay there because we can lift the caliper up, and once it's lifted up, we will then have enough room just to wiggle this out, and the bolt can stay in there while we do the work. Now, it's important not to let the brake caliper hang from the brake hose, because that can also stress it. So by folding it up and tucking it round out of the way, all is good. And now we've got to the pads. You can see they're not all the way down on this side, but I've seen on the other side that there's very, very slight scuff marks on the tip of the disc here, which means that we're there. The pads should just pull out, all being well. But these have been here, as I showed you, for 290,000 kilometers. So I'm going to need to get my tool onto that and pull them out, and then probably a bit of clean up on the mountings as well to make sure the replacement pads are nice and free moving. So on the inner pad at the bottom is the brake pad wear sense that I was telling you about, this kind of spring clip looking thing. The idea is that when the pad gets really low, the tip of this will just touch the disc, and it makes a metallic kind of screech noise to persuade you to go and speak to the mechanic and get something done about your brakes. Now the other side is quite clearly squeaking. This one is a fraction of a millimetre away from it, but a little bit of unevenness is not unexpected. It just can happen over time, and we do have 290,000 kilometers on these, so a little bit of variation is not necessarily a problem. You can see that the brake pads have a tiny bit of wear left in them, but the other side I know for sure is gone. You can also see from the shape on them, there's been a little bit of corrosion on the inner face of the disc, which is very typical on these, but it's not excessive, and therefore we'll be able to put some new pads in here quite comfortably. So I've opened up the box with the brake pads. I've chosen pads to match so that the wear sensor is in the same position. You can see the difference in thickness between old and new. Rather surprisingly, even though they're Bosch, these ones have come without the anti-rattle shims. Most brake pad kits these days can have the shims, but where they don't, you just have to take the ones off the brake pads that have been used, take them off carefully and clip them onto the new pads, and then you're ready just to make sure they're a nice easy fit in the caliper stroke pad mounting, and then we can reassemble everything. So yeah, the pads do just slip in and out by hand, so nice and free, no need for any issues. I'm going to just blow the area off with an airline, wearing my dust mask obviously, to get rid of any unwanted loose stuff, but because they fit in nice and easily, I'm just going to transfer the shims across, then we can refit the caliper, and then we're ready to move across to the other side. So sometimes you find when you're transferring the shims that the kind of little clips here that hold them onto the pad backing have got a little bit loose, so I just use a pair of needle nose pliers to bend them in slightly like that. I can't show it to you properly because it's a two-hand job, but yeah, just bend the tabs in a fraction, and then they stay nicely located on the back of the brake pad for when you put the brake pad back in the car. And there we have it. The spring clips have just been tweaked a little bit to keep the tension on them, and that now stays in position. Oddly enough, this particular car on this particular set of pads has two of them, so I'm just going to do the second one as well. You can tell this one's the outer one from where it's got the kind of leg marks from where it's been pressed, so I'll just refit this one in exactly the same way and pop the pad in. And there we have it. That's the second shim clipped into position, and then the pad just drops into the anti-rattle mountings, and we're ready to deal with the inner one. And here's the inner one. This one had two shims in it as well, and obviously because that's how it came from the factory, that's how I'm putting it back. Like with the outside, you can tell this one's the inside because this one has the mark that the piston has left on the shim. So we're going to just drop this back in, and then we can refit the caliper. So the inner pad dropped in as neatly as the outer one did, so it's time to refit the caliper. I like to put a little wipe of copper slip onto these sliding pins before I refit anything. And this one, because the pin didn't come out, we just have to wiggle it back into position here. There we go. Just going to start screwing that into the caliper. And then with the lower pin, just going to put a wipe of copper slip onto that as well, pop it into position and do it all up nice and tight. And it's going to be the opposite of undoing them. So doing them up, I'm going to start with the lower one. It's running too freely and isn't triggering the ratchet yet, so I'll start it off by hand. And then you can see here how when I'm pulling to tighten it, it's actually pushing the caliper in towards the mounting rather than trying to pull it off the car, which if I started with the top one, then the bottom one would be trying to pull out. So that's that nice and secure. Do the same on here. And that is basically job done. It is vital though to remember when you get back in the car just to pump the brake pedal at least once, because the piston often doesn't meet the pads completely until you've operated the brake system, and by pressing the brake pedal as soon as you get in the car means that when you go to drive it away, you don't suddenly find you've got masses of travel on the pedal. Just something to watch out for. As it's been a while since these wheels were off, I'll put a dab of copper slip onto these studs as well, just to make sure they don't seize. But yeah, that's basically it. It's going to be the same the other side, but no need to bore you with the details because they're exactly the same. Obviously, calipers that have the parking brake built in are a completely different issue, and the next time I get one in, I will cover that with a video. But for just a regular rear hydraulic caliper with a handbrake inside the rear drum here, that's done and dusted. So this is the other side, and just so that you can see how well it works, here is the brake pad wear sensor, and you can see here where the tip of it has just got very, very slightly polished from where it just touches on the brake disc as the pads gets down to minimum thickness. And then when this touches on the brake disc, you get that kind of screet, screet, screet noise when you're braking, which tells you that it's time to pop in and see your trusted mechanic. Here's a little trick I learned many years ago. When you're refitting wheels, I've got a nice little beer crate here for sitting on, but when you're refitting wheels, if you support them with your feet while you're trying to line it all up, it means your feet can do the lifting while your eyes and your hands just line up the studs on the wheel holes. Makes it so much easier. So that's that all done. First task is to just pump the brake pedal. Yep, straight to the floor for the first one, and you really don't want that when you're setting off. So I've pumped it a couple of times to make sure we're up to pressure, and then the last job is just to make sure there's sufficient fluid in the brake reservoir, and there is. You can see the level up here. So that's all good. Job finished.